I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. So I mentioned on a recent episode of The Secret Show that I envied the chess world their candor. That is, there's not really any disputing in chess who's better or worse. Well, I mean, there's some, but it's sort of, every theory is pretty readily testable, except for those that, deal with like dead people, like, well, could Jordan in his prime beat LeBron today? There are those kind of conversations, but for the most part, there's not really the same kind of, there's a clarity to excellence in chess. And this extends to people who are not the greatest, right? Like when people across time, across space, across sex, age, race, ethnicity, language, discuss chess, when they play chess, when they, there's no pretending somebody's good when he's not. There's not really any flattery, right? Because it's just so transparently meaningless. And so there's actually no embarrassment either about failure. I mean, it's a sport effectively, so people are competitive, but there's not a bashfulness about whether or not you might be a fraud. One would argue there are no frauds in chess, right? So I envy the chess world, this clarity and this candor. And I mentioned that on a recent episode of The Secret Show, saying sort of if only we could speak that way ever. Not that I want to speak that way all the time, but like if only we could speak that way ever about poetry. And then just yesterday, I was watching this interview with Ding Liren, the current chess world champion. It was a chess.com interview. I'll go ahead and list here. There are a number of different sources I have for some of the things. This is, by the way, this is a chess episode. It's also very much a poetry episode. So those of you who hate chess may still hate it, but there is a lot of poetry in it nonetheless. I did, chess.com /chess24 has some great broadcasts. Gotham Chess is a great resource. Take is Magnus Carlsen's new platform. They do really good coverage as well as some others. But those are sort of three main sources. But at any rate, I was watching this interview with Ding, and he was asked about a gift he got before the last World Championship. So in 2023, he beat Jan Nepomniachtchi to become the chess world champion, the first Chinese chess world champion in history. And before that match, he was given a poem. I didn't know this. He was given a poem by Wei Yi, who's another Chinese player and another super grandmaster. That is, not just the highest title one can have in chess, but in the even more elect group of those with a just an astonishingly high game rating. So Wei Yi gave Ding Liren a poem that he had written for the occasion, and apparently it was so touching that Ding cried when he read it. And I was inclined to think this was sort of mere sentimentality. When it's a stressful and intense occasion, and if your friend gives you a poem expressing his support, it might make you cry even if the poem's sort of shitty. But then the interviewer asked him what the best gift he received this year might have been. He's been the sitting world champion for a year. He's had actually a terrible year. He has not won a game in almost an entire year. Like leading up to the first game of this world championship, he had not won a game in 304 days. So he's had a terrible year. And his opponent is heavily favored to beat him. But before this championship started, the first game was played today. He was, the interviewer said, so, what was the best gift you got this year? And Ding's answer was, oh, somebody else gave me a poem as well, but it wasn't as good as Wei Yi's. Just flatly, just in the same way that you would say Danya Naroditsky's an excellent grandmaster, but he's nothing compared to Alireza Firouzja, right? Like there's no, like in both Danya Naroditsky and Alireza Firouzja would agree to that immediately. There's no comparison. It's just obvious. And Ding just treated the poems the same way. He said, oh, well, this one just wasn't as good. And so that then made me really interested in the poem that he'd gotten from Wei Yi. I will get to that in a minute, and I will get to some really excellent commentary that I got from Ethan McGuire. So I cannot thank Ethan enough. He provided some really, really good resources for this. I'm literally just finding a new email from him he just sent that is also about this topic. So I will get to that in a minute. Maybe I'll read that live because it looks like he sent a poem. Yeah, really, really smart thoughts on Chinese poetry. But first, I will just say that the game played today is one of the best games of chess I've ever seen. Now, as I've said many times, I am an idiot when it comes to poetry. I'm immeasurably more of an idiot when it comes to chess. So I don't, I don't know what I'm talking about. But even some of the people who do know what they're talking about seem to agree it was an extraordinary game, particularly in a world championship match. So what tends to happen in world championship matches is that players work toward a draw for the most part. That is, the white pieces have a slight advantage. The players alternate white pieces and black pieces. And so the player with the white pieces might play for a win, unless he's ahead, in which case he'll probably play for a draw. The player with the black pieces will almost always play for a draw regardless, because it's a slight disadvantage, and if you can just neutralize your opponent and eliminate the threat of the white pieces, then that's a victory for you. So if you're playing with the black pieces, a draw is a win. Ding he started with the black pieces. It was decided on a coin toss. The first game, he had the black pieces. His opponent, Gukesh Moraju, had the white pieces. Now, Ding is the surname. The Chinese surname comes first. He's universally referred to as Ding. Gukesh Moraju is an Indian player. The Gukesh is, I believe, his given name, but he is universally known as either Gukesh D or just Gukesh. So I will strangely be referring to one of them by his first name and one of them by his family name, but that's the convention. This tends to happen. It's sort of like with, as I've said before, with like Italian Renaissance painters or like Black civil rights leaders. There's certain people who, when they're so well respected that we just use their first names instead of their last names. Dante, actually, not just Italian painters, but Italian Renaissance poets as well. Magnus too. Magnus Carlsen is known universally as Magnus, even though, or I guess unless you're a Norwegian, in which case he's known as Magnus, or however they pronounce that. It is a pretty interesting story this year, just for the match, and it is. I have found myself deeply, deeply identifying with Ding in a dumb way that, like, I've always sort of smirked at people who identify with athletes, and they're like, well, you're not really anything like Carmelo Anthony, like you just sort of like his playing style, I guess. I'm nothing like Ding Liren, but I have identified a lot with him in the lead up to this match. He is by far the underdog, even though he's the sitting world champion. Nobody thinks he's the best player in the world. He's not even in the top 10 players in the world. He's currently ranked 20 something. He's had a terrible year. His best year was 2018, and he had good years in 2018, 2019, and then the COVID lockdowns just hit him like a semi truck. I mean, he's Chinese and he was living in China, and China's lockdowns were probably more severe than any other countries. He was effectively unable to play anyone except online for a year or more. And he was completely isolated. He became extremely depressed. He's also very unusual in that he speaks very openly about his mental health. He's spoken a lot about depression, about his self-loathing, his lack of faith in himself. He's the only world championship contender even who has ever stated that his opponent was the favorite to win the match. Nobody says that. You feel like in order to be an athlete, you have to have a certain kind of delusional confidence, and he seems not to. Like, he seems truly to be like the depressive realist of the chess world. He said, "Oh well, Gukesh." He said, "I might. There's a good chance that I will lose this match very badly to Gukesh." He won the 2023 championship, but it was a wild game wild match, and he was behind the whole time until he finally won at the end. He's very emotional. He had one game where he completely melted down and effectively flagged, like ran out of time over the board, which at that level doesn't happen really. He's a very emotional player. He's sort of homely. He's very, very quiet. He insists on giving almost all of his interviews in English, but his English is really not great. I mean, it's about 1 million times better than my Chinese or Mandarin Cantonese or whatever. But he's quite halting in English. He has a very, very quiet voice, and he's really a very retiring personality. Gukesh, by contrast, is extremely young. He just turned 18. He was 17 when he qualified for the championship. Just turned 18. He's unlike Ding. He is young. He is handsome. He is fluent in English. He's very dapper and is just a universal favorite to win the match. Is rated much higher than Ding and has had an astounding year. I mean, India in general has had an amazing year. India basically swept the Chess Olympiad, which was played pretty recently. Both the men's and women's teams are just amazing. Like, India is shaping up to be what the USSR was for a long time. Like the World Championship is basically going to be like two Indian guys playing each other for like the foreseeable future, it seems like. Though the US actually still has like some of the very best players in the world. Again, I think you are seeing some of the like Darwinian advantages of size. Like, this is not in social or genetic Darwinism, but just in terms of competition. As Darwin pointed out, like, the most important factor in competition is the size of the pool. How big a pool were you competing in, out of which you emerged victorious? Because the person who emerged from the bigger pool is going to be better. So you do see, it is very, very rare that a country like Norway, where still the best player in the world is from, it's very rare that they produce, such a dominant player, just because countries like China and India and the US have better odds. They just have more chances to produce. And Russia still produces a lot of great players. But not just Gukesh, but India in general is the favorite for this match. They've got an enormous amount of momentum coming into it. Got the white pieces. And at the Chess Olympiad, Ding almost won a game and then lost it through clumsy playing at the end, and was so devastated that he sat out the game he was supposed to play against Gukesh. Like, he and Gukesh were supposed to be the first tables, like the first boards, like the best players respectively from their countries when China and India played each other. Right, the countries get stacked up against each other, and their best players all sort of line up in order to play each other. And Gukesh and Ding were the first board for India, or were first boards for India and China. And Ding sat out the game. He didn't play the game he was supposed to play. I mean, everybody knew he was going to be facing off with Gukesh in the championship, but he sat out his game against him in the Olympiad, and then China lost. Like, had he played Gukesh and won, China might have won the Olympiad, but he sat it out and China lost because he was too depressed, which is just devastating. And so I just absolutely, like everybody has favored Gukesh to win, and it seems like the smart money is still very much on Gukesh, but like my heart has completely gone out to Ding. I will return to today and the first game of the championship, but I wanted to get, so I found online a copy of the poem Wei Yi gave Ding at last year's championship. And I found the text in classical Chinese characters, as I learned only later. I just saw they looked like Chinese characters. I found that they were classical Chinese. I have no real understanding of all the differences in dialect and styles of representation. I know there's another, the Roman character transliteration is called pinyin, that presentation of the letters or the Chinese sounds. But these are little standardized ideograms, and I found like some very incoherent translations online, and so I sent the characters to Ethan McGuire, who is a translator of Chinese poetry. He knows Chinese. I mean, again, I'm sure I'm mischaracterizing things. He said, "Oh, you don't write Chinese in different dialects. I don't really understand how you would write. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't know." But at any rate, he very generously responded, not just with a lot of context for the poem, but with a very rough. He provided a transliteration as well as a very rough literal translation. I mean, it's really closer to like a trot. He said, I don't want to suggest, Ethan tends to be very careful about the craft of his translations. And so this is not really a proper translation. This is just sort of a literal rendering of the line by line sense. Yeah, I'll start with that just so that you can have it in your head. And then I'll talk through some of his, I'll read some of Ethan's commentary, maybe talk through some of my thoughts on it, and then get back to today's game, which was, as I said, one of the more interesting games I've ever seen. I mean, it is certainly the most interesting game I've seen live, I think, or I watched like a slight delayed recording, but I watched it this morning. All right, so this is Wei Yi's poem for Ding that he gave him right before the 2023 match. This is again a very straightforward literal rendering of the lines, denotation. That's all. Quiet April comes silently. I am lonely, as my old friend traverses 1,000 miles. A caged bird soaring free, up and among the 9 heavens, divine. A koi fish leaving the pond to join the river's flow. Though home lies far behind him, since he has close companionship with good friends, why should he worry? Well, it is true that human affairs are fraught. In life we often misstep, and each day sorrow presses in on us, closer and closer. Even so, there, in the black and the white, friend, you will find few schemes or guile. Instead, you will find a kind of purity. Make the long march forward now to face the enemy's formed ranks. Fight with strength and courage and never look backward. When you return on the 26th, we will celebrate. We will drink to our fills and never again part ways. I'll read it one more time quickly. And it is in the original form, it is written in 14 lines. Ethan doesn't make any mention of this, and clearly this is not part of the Chinese tradition, but it is, coincidentally written in 14 lines, organized into 3 quatrains and a couplet, though the quatrains are rhymed ABXB, as he says, not ABAB. So sort of a ghost outline of an English sonnet there. All right, I'll just read it one more time quickly. Quiet April comes silently. I am lonely, as my old friend traverses 1,000 miles. A caged bird soaring free, up and among the 9 heavens, divine. A koi fish leaving the pond to join the river's flow. Though home lies far behind him, Since he has close companionship with good friends, why should he worry? Well, it is true that human affairs are fraught. In life we often misstep. And each day sorrow presses in on us closer and closer. Even so, there, in the black and the white, friend, you will find few schemes or guile. Instead, you will find a kind of purity. Make the long march forward now to face the enemy's formed ranks. Fight with strength and courage and never look backward. When you return on the 26th, we will celebrate. We will drink to our fills and never again part ways. So, it was funny. I didn't like this poem until I started liking it. The opening feels very stilted to me. I mean, again, this is not the poem. This is just following the denotation, it felt sort of, stilted, certainly highly, highly artificial. I asked Ethan about what seems like a redundancy to me in the first line, Quiet April Comes Silently. He pointed out that the first two characters are identical. That the first three characters read and again, I'm not going to have the tone, but something like GGC. So quiet, quiet, and then C is 4, as Ethan says, which refers to the 4th month, but can also be is also associated with death. So quiet, quiet April, or quiet, quiet death, and it's unlike the English word quiet or even silently, GGC is a little more has a little more of a mimetic quality of a hushing or a whispering or a shuffling sound. But yeah, I was not just the redundancy in the first line, but what struck my ear sort of like the loftiness of my old friend traverses 1,000 miles, a caged bird soaring free up and among the 9 heavens divine, a koi fish leaving the pond to join the river's flow. It feels like almost a parody of classical Chinese poetry. And that's not totally inaccurate. I mean, Ethan, points out that he recognizes a number of references to classical Chinese poems in here, and he says there's probably many more that he's not picking up on. He specifically recognized Du Fu. I actually also thought of a Du Fu poem, the one Du Fu poem, or maybe I know two. He also cites the references to the Tao, the river's flow, and the black and the white, which of course is also the yin and the yang, the emptiness and fullness, but also of course a reference to the colors of the chess pieces. But as I read more of Ethan's commentary, I thought about that kind of the stiltedness and the high artifice and formality of even the imagery in that opening stanza. He says that what Wei Yi did was not just a nice gesture from a friend, but a very well established Chinese tradition. He says, in classical Chinese verse, friends exchanging poems, or even just one friend giving another friend a poem, is one of the most common literary practices. Of course, you had the Chinese literati who did this, and many of theirs are famous, especially in the Tang Dynasty, poets such as Li Bai and Du Fu, or really Li Bai with a great number of people, but anyone in Chinese academics, politics, military, etc. were expected to be able to write occasional poems. So that was part of Chinese education, and my guess is that there's still some remnants of that today. It was like what I recognized in the little bit of time I spent in the UK was that even in bars, there just seemed to be a little more ready familiarity, at least among people who'd gone to prep schools or college, with English verse. The people just tended to have it by heart. You'd hear people cite it, refer to it, repeat it. They just knew lines of verse from canonical poems by heart in a way that you really cannot remotely count on people knowing in the US. And my guess is that there's some of this, it's not as formal as it was during the Tang Dynasty, but there's probably some of this tradition left in, particularly among educated Chinese today. And that kind of high artifice and formality, the conventional images, conventional constructions, that is part of what makes it possible for ordinary educated people who don't consider themselves artists to be capable of writing occasional verse. That is, if it is a skill, if it is a sort of a social ritual or game, then it's learnable. Then you can be respectably decent at it, right? You can not embarrass yourself with an effort. Whereas I think in the US, we think of poetry so much as an expression of individual vision or passion that it becomes sort of clumsy to give somebody a poem for a big event in his life. It's sort of like, hey, could you have an orgasm for my wedding? Like, it just feels like it's a little, we don't have the right culture for it. And so all of that sort of stiff imagery, the same way that, like, if you go to the UK, or I think the Aussies and the Canucks do it as well, in their courts, they still wear like wigs and robes. And it's just what you do. They're not putting on airs. They're not being pretentious. That's just the convention. Even chess pieces, right? Like, chess pieces are like shaped like knights and kind of vague representations of kings and queens and bishops. Rooks are, castles, which is, strange because the rook was originally a war chariot, I think. Actually, even before that, it was an elephant. So chess, by the way, like, India is not just dominant in chess at the moment, but is the birthplace of chess. Back when it was called Chaturanga, and some of the pieces were elephants, which is really like, boy, I'm sorry we lost that, because like that's so much cooler than little castles. But like, when chess players play with little carved horses, they're not being pretentious. They're not being artificial. They're not saying, I like horses and that's why I'm playing chess with horses. No, that's how you fucking play the game. And so I'm guessing, again, this is speaking as an absolute outsider, but I'm guessing that in Chinese poetry, some of that stiff convention is just part of how you play the game, and it's part of what makes it learnable if you're just an educated person who doesn't consider yourself an artistic spirit. You're not writing a poem in order to express your inner essence. You're writing a poem in order to commemorate your friend's special occasion, in order to show affection, in order to fulfill a social ritual and carry out, be courteous. Bring a housewarming gift when you come to somebody's house, right? Hold the door for someone as she's walking in. It's a way to show respect. We don't have a lot of those in the US. I think it is partly our commitment to individualism. There is, by the way, there are a few different resources I drew on for this episode. A really terrific one is a recent episode of Poetry Says. I think it's 263. I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes. Water Dragon Blues, episode 263. Alice goes. She talks about a few things, but she talks in particular about a poem by Du Fu about Li Bai, and she goes through several different translations of it, including, I can't remember if she shares some of her own where she just sort of alludes to she's working on a translation of it. And as I think I told her, the episode inspired me not to try to translate it, but to sort of write I do the kind of, imitation tribute poems, and I'm working on one to the same poem. It's called Dreaming of Li Bai. It's a wonderful poem by Du Fu. So please go check out that episode. It's really excellent. And she talks a lot about the conventionality of Chinese poetry, and even as she points out, like there are choices in Chinese poetry that we would look on as even something like plagiarism, that are just part of how it's done. So yeah, like, even though to my American ears the first stanza lands kind of clunkily, I'm guessing that for one thing, as Ethan says, it sounds a hell of a lot better in Chinese, but also it probably sounds better in Chinese culture, right? If you know what, like, you would if you showed up in a wig and gown in an American court of law, it would not it would not go well, right? But in a British court, if you showed up without one, you would look like a fool. All right. So I did think, though, like among the other thoughts I had, I mean, there were a couple. I was struck by what seems to me, again, from my very, very limited exposure to Tang Dynasty poetry, maybe a convention that I'm sort of interested in, because it feels like a way of speaking, a kind of speech that at least when I heard it in this poem, it sounded Chinese to my ear, which is this sort of like mid-poem rhetorical question. Though home lies far behind him, since he has close companionship with good friends, why should he worry? And I immediately thought of The River Merchant's Wife, a Letter, which is, of course, a bastardized translation of, I think, a Li Bai, or I think he calls him Li Po. I believe that's the same poet, Li Bai, Li Po. It's a bastardized translation, as Ezra Pound called it, of a poem by Li Bai or Li Po. And there is this line in the middle of the poem: "Why should I climb the lookout? At 15, I stopped scowling. I desired my dust to be mingled with yours forever and forever and forever. Why should I climb the lookout?" And then in Dreaming of Li Bai as well, there's this mid-poem rhetorical question: "I fear yours is no living soul. How could it make this distant flight?" I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's just a coincidence that I'm recognizing from these three poems, but now I want to steal it. Like, now I want to, like, study Tang poetry and like integrate this, because there are things that I think it would be very difficult and clumsy to integrate into American English poetry, like, probably the Koi Pond and the Nine Heavens, like that. There probably isn't a way to bring those in, and I'm not particularly inclined to. But there's something about that sort of wistful mid-poem rhetorical question that interests me, because it's just sort of it's a slightly different maneuver than I'm used to. And then just the open celebration of, like, again, I mean, it's not at all like Chinese. It's pretty universal. I mean, really, it's like, it is not Chinese. It is poetic. It is poet-like, rather. Just the open celebration of drinking and friendship feels Horatian. We will celebrate when you return on the 20th. I love that there's a specific date. I mean, it is probably the specific date that the match was going to be over and he was going to come home. But I love that it's included here, the specificity of it. When you return on the 26th, we will celebrate, we will drink to our fills and never again part ways. This reminded me of, it took me forever to figure out where this had been from. I thought it was from a Poetry Says episode. I think it did start me on a conversation with Alice at some point about Tang Dynasty poets, because she of course also did a lovely episode about one of her favorite poems by Dorothy Porter. Is it Dorothy Porter who has the poem where there's the lines, "There's a damp melancholy in Tang poetry"? Well, she did an episode on that a while back. But it was so I did an episode ages ago with Stephen Marsh on his little book on writing and failure, and we talked about a number of things in this book. Since reading it, the little snatch of it that has hung in my mind most stubbornly, I don't know how much we mentioned it on the episode, but it's the passage he wrote about Li Bai and Du Fu and their friendship and their drinking. Great, he quotes this little, again, and God only knows, how one should look at these as translations, but he quotes the lines from Du Fu: "I declare I love Li Bai the way I would a brother. It's autumn. We get drunk and share a bed to sleep it off." Yeah, there's a few pages on the two of them that are really heartbreaking. But I'll just read this first little paragraph that he has about them, because I think it's quite moving. In the rambling, so this is from Stephen March's book on writing and failure. In the rambling failures of their lives, the two master poets shared geography only once. They met in Hunan province after Li Bai had dissipated himself out of court and Du Fu had failed the imperial examinations. Li Bai, the elder, was in his early 40s. Du Fu, 32. If there is one activity that defines the life of a writer other than writing, it is borrowing money to drink. And while Chinese scholars dispute who was the greater poet, Li Bai or Du Fu, with the decision weighing slightly in favor of Du Fu. At cadging drinks, Li Bai can never be topped. This is the champion of cadging drinks. At cadging drinks, Li Bai can never be topped. After his friend Ho Chi Chang died, Li Bai memorialized the booze. These are two lines from one of his poems. I remember how once he pawned his golden tortoise to buy me wine, and tears wet my scarf. Just the physical specificity of that is wonderful. I remember how once he pawned his golden tortoise to buy me wine, and tears wet my scarf. Oh. But yeah, I thought of those poems, and it was reassuring that, I think reading Ethan's rendering of this and reading his notes on it, he says it's cleverly rhymed and metered. And there's Chinese meter has to do with syllables, but also tones in a way that, is beyond me. But it's actually a pretty good poem. And I think it's probably a pretty good poem in part, again, because of the conventionality of Chinese poetry and the lack of emphasis on individuality. I would be interested to hear Ethan's thoughts on that, but not the lack of individuality, the lack of individualism that allows a gesture like this to be possible. And I wonder, who knows, but I wonder if maybe if you are an educated person and you have been taught to write poems, to write verse competently for occasions, then you probably are, I could imagine that being somebody who is more able to be realistic about his abilities than an American. But an American poet, even if you don't consider yourself a poet, if you write a poem, we see that poem, the way we understand that is that poem is an expression of your spirit, your heart, your soul. And so for somebody to say well, thanks, but Wei Yi's was better, that's horrible, because they're saying your soul is inferior. But I wonder if the person who gave him the second poem, he said, well, thanks, but the last year's was a lot better. I wonder if that's not just saying well, he's got a better golf game than I do. He's got, he's a lot better at tennis than I am. If it's not something you, I have a couple of friends I play a little bit of chess with, and I play chess with my cousin JP, who's really good. He's an amateur, but for amateurs, as amateurs go, he's quite good. I played him in Atlanta, and there's no ambiguity. He's definitely way better than I am, and we both know that. And I was proud to be able to play a game where I lasted 20 odd moves before his advantage became just crushing. I was able not to get, snuffed out in the opening, and I was able to kind of at least maintain a respectable balance until we'd gotten well into the middle game. And then I have a friend here who just started playing, and we play some, and it's not, I'm very, very bad, but I'm a lot better than he is. We're not bashful about that, because chess is not a thing. We're not chess guys. It's just a thing we like to do sometimes. And so how wonderful in a way to be able to treat poetry that way. Yeah, I wonder if for him, for the person who gave him that second poem, that was not actually an embarrassing observation. That was just a factual remark. That's sort of wonderful. I will also share. Maybe I'll wait on that, because I do have to tell you. As I said, this is a poetry episode. It is also a chess episode, and I have to at least give you a brief account of the game today, because it was so fucking good. Gukesh had the white pieces, as I said. Ding had the black pieces. Gukesh had all of the momentum. Even Ding had said Gukesh was probably going to win. And he may, and honestly probably will, still win the match, right? It's a 14-game match. And the first to 7.5 points wins. You get a half point for a draw. Though the I'll give credit to two entities, one being FIDE, the Chess Federation, which has added an interesting wrinkle to this year's gameplay because grandmasters at this level tend to play for a draw when they can. And in order to play for a win, you have to play a little bit more openly, a little more riskily. FIDE has added a bounty to every individual game, so that for every win, the winner of that individual game gets $200,000. So they've created a little incentive to play more aggressively, not just to play for draws. Famously in 2018-19, when Carlsen and Caruana played, they played 14 draws in a row. So it was good for opening theory, but not an exciting sports match to watch. But the other person I have to credit for the excitement of both last year's match and at least this first game is Magnus Carlsen himself, who said he thought it was boring for him just to sit and play at the top and play extremely conservative games against other super grandmasters. He said it would be more fun if you had to compete every year to make it to the championship. They still haven't adopted that model, like the World Series model. He has opted not to compete. So he qualified to play in the candidates tournament, and he declined because it's not fun. He said it's more fun to play at other play matches leading. He plays tons of chess still, and he's just absolutely dominant. He still is by far the best player in the world. But he said it's more fun to let's have it out a little bit more, and it is. It's been much more fun. So this was a fantastic game. Gukesh played his first 10 moves in less than a minute and a half. He spent 1minute 28 seconds on his first 10 moves. And 10 moves is generally considered about the length of the opening. The game is broken into the opening game, the middle game, and the end game. And 10 to 15 moves is generally considered the opening. Gukesh played his entire opening in a minute and a half. Ding played his first 10 moves in 45 minutes. And he spent half an hour of that time on one move. I think it was move 7. So they have 2 hours for the first 40 moves. And by move 10, Ding had used almost half his time. I think it was 47 minutes he spent on the first 10 moves. During that long pause from move 7, he had his face in his hands. He does not have a poker face. He's very expressive. He's very he looks. I think the statue that's commonly called the Thinker, the Rodin statue, is, I believe it was originally called the Poet, and it's supposed to be a depiction of Dante, though he looks way more jacked than I imagine Dante being. But Ding is like that. He's like a less picturesque version of the Thinker. He just buries himself in thought. And he looked much the way he did when he melted down in the 2023 championship. And he flagged, he timed out. And all of the commentators seemed to think he was having an emotional meltdown, that he was thinking too long, that this was not a move. He was way too early to be having these kind of thoughts. The reason, by the way, that Gukesh played his first 10 moves so quickly was that he was still in preparation, meaning he had memorized all of those possibilities. He was playing with the white pieces, so he had the opportunity to present a novelty first, that is to kind of to do something new in the game. And so, he got to choose what line to play or what opening to play, and then he got to choose to play a novelty for, it was his preparation. He had prepared to bring Ding down this particular path. Ding later said, and this is it was such the answer lines up so perfectly with the common misreading of The Road Not Taken, with the one that assumes that the poem is actually called The Road Less Traveled. His answer to the question about what he was thinking about lines up so perfectly with the common misreading of that poem that I'm tempted to draw more of a connection than I should, but I won't, because it's wrong, because that's the wrong reading. But he said he was not wondering how to play his next move exactly. What he was actually calculating very, very far in advance. And in fact, the move he played, which was a pawn push, paid off devastatingly 20 odd moves down the road. And like the number of possible branches that you have in 20 moves of chess is unfathomable. He was calculating, and he said the choice he was making, really, he was weighing two choices. He was not choosing between two particular moves exactly. He was choosing between two lines. That is, two possible futures, literally two paths of possibility. One that he knew very well, right? Because he, of course, had done his own preparation. He had worked through a lot of these possibilities. And his guru, his sort of right-hand man is Richard Rapport, who's I believe a Hungarian player who's very, unlike Ding, is like sort of handsome and very flashy and wears sort of like hipster clothes, and is famous for very aggressive, very experimental, creative play. Big flashy sacrifices, sort of Mikhail Tal style chess. And so he's a sort of a strangely perfect foil for Ding, and like they're very good friends, and he helped Ding with a lot of his preparation. And notably, Rapport is a French defense specialist, and Ding did play the French defense, which was a huge surprise because he has not played it literally since the last World Championship, and it is generally not fared well in World Championship games. He's very, very consistently answers e4 with e5, and today he answered it with e6. That's right, e6. I'm counting backwards, yeah, which is the French defense. But at any rate, as I said, he was choosing between these two possible paths, right? One that he had calculated out, he prepared deep into the game. He knew it very well. And the other one was open. He saw some of it, but he couldn't see all of it because he hadn't prepared that far. And he said he ultimately chose to take literally the road less traveled. He decided to invent the future. He knew he could go down a path, which presumably would have been a path toward a draw, right? Because he was playing defensively with the black pieces against a favored opponent with the white pieces. And so presumably this calculated, planned, familiar path was a path toward draw. And he went into the dark. Though, as I said, he definitely was not pushing that pawn blindly. He had a plan for it, and that plan did come to fruition. And boy, it really was, that was the nail in the coffin in the end. 10 moves in, Gukesh has almost the entirety of his time left, right? And Ding has an hour and 13 minutes left. They play about 8 more moves of like slightly more evenly spaced play. Gukesh does start to take a little bit of time, particularly with Ding's own novel response, which was a queen move. But then around move 18, Ding starts blitzing perfect moves. That is, he starts playing immediately moves that are like not just only moves, but like great moves. Moves that the computer engine marks with an exclamation point. Right? In chess, an exclamation point is good, a question mark is bad. A double exclamation point is a brilliancy. It's like an extraordinary, rare move. Double question mark is it's like you fucked up. Actually, I don't know if they do double question. Maybe they just do like an X for blood, like a real bad move. But Ding just starts getting exclamation point in a row, blitzing moves like he's playing with no time left. But very quickly, he establishes a time advantage where Gukesh really, really starts running out of time. He starts to see that it has looked for a while, for a lot of that middle game, after that long, drawn-out opening, it has looked to the commentators and it has looked to Gukesh. You can see from Gukesh's posture that Ding is just shuffling around pieces in his back ranks. He keeps doing these backward bishop and knight moves, like in his back 3 ranks, not really going anywhere. And then he suddenly explodes with his knight and his rook, and it's just crushing. And Gukesh plays so down to the wire. He gets run down so much that so at 40 moves, they get an extra 30 minutes, as well as a time increment, which means they get a little bonus time for every move they play. But if they cannot make the first 40 moves in 2 hours, they lose. Gukesh played his 40th move with 1 second to spare. And by then, the game had really turned. And Ding sat at the board for over 4 hours. And then only when the game was really and truly all but over did he finally get... He was asked what, because during the last World Championship, he spent a lot of time away from the board in his, each player has his own private lounge where they have they have a TV screen showing the live board, but they also, at this point, they have the whole board in their heads. They don't need to see the board. But both he and Nepomniachtchi spent most of their match sitting in their lounges, not even at the board together. But Ding sat at the board for a solid 4 hours and change until he had really, really cinched the game. And then he got up. Went into the lounge, and you could just see on the screen, he just housed a whole bag of trail mix and then chugged a bottle of water. And then he went back out. To the board in time to accept Gukesh's resignation. He moved his king out of check. He had one opportunity to really, really fuck up the game by moving into the wrong square, but he moved into the right square, and Gukesh immediately resigned. So it was an extraordinary game. You saw, by the way, Gukesh is famously very composed. His trademark is to sort of cross his arms and close his eyes at the chessboard. He's I think pretty religious as well, and so he does have this sort of meditating. So I mean, he talks about like centering himself and finding himself, getting in touch with himself. He's amazing, powerful mind, and very disciplined as well. But you could see Gukesh has a very severe poker face. You could read his posture mostly in how far he was leaning one direction or the other. But then the other thing that was this amazing tell throughout the latter part of the game was Gukesh was sitting stock still, staring at the board with a perfectly expressionless face, but you could see the headrest of the chair behind him vibrating furiously. Because, of course, under the table, his leg was hammering like a jackrabbit. Like his leg was clearly like hammering away, and it was making the back of his chair. You could just see it. Yeah, kind of a glorious game for like melancholic, old, socially awkward guys. Like again, who knows how the rest of the match will go, but it truly warmed my heart to watch Ding win today. I'll finish with another. Here. So Ethan shared this little poem, his translation of a poem by Li Bai. This is another one of these sort of friendship poems on the occasion of basically a valediction to the poet Mang Haoren. The poem's called A Goodbye from the Yellow Crane Tower. Again, I don't know if that's actually a title the poem has in the original, or if, as with like Roman poems, Ethan maybe adding a descriptive title. There's a little pre-poem text that under the title that reads, "Saying so long to my old friend Mang Haoren, seeing him off for Guangling from the Yellow Crane Tower." And here's the poem. It's just 4 lines. "Inside the fabled tower, farewell to my oldest friend. Under spring blossoms he sets sail. But why? I have forgotten." There's that fucking rhetorical question again. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Sorry, I'll start again. This is A Goodbye from the Yellow Crane Tower by Li Bai. It's addressed to Mang Haoren. "Inside the fabled tower, farewell to my oldest friend. Under spring blossoms he sets sail, but why? I have forgotten. His lonely vessel fades in azure skies around the bend. There's nothing left. The Yangtze River flows to the horizon." Boy, if you want to catnip for me, put "there's nothing left" in the last line of your poem, but not as the end of your poem. All right, A Goodbye from the Yellow Crane Tower by Li Bai. And this is translated by Ethan. "Saying so long to my old friend Mang Haoren, seeing him off for Guangling from the Yellow Crane Tower. Inside the fabled tower, Farewell to my oldest friend. Under spring blossoms he sets sail, but why? I have forgotten. His lonely vessel fades in azure skies around the bend. There's nothing left. The Yangtze River flows to the horizon. Oh, he has a little note. He said he was thinking about, obviously this was, the Wei Yi poem was from last year, but I mentioned something about Ding's win today to Ethan, and he said, I wonder, was he thinking of the poet Lao Tzu? The poem Wei Yi wrote had some references to Lao Tzu, the Taoist poet. And then Ethan says, as verse 28 of the Tao Te Ching says, know the white well, but keep to the black. Be a pattern for the world, and the Tao will be strong inside you, even so that there will be nothing you cannot accomplish. Another like maybe Taoist, but also like very sympathetic choice that Ding made when he was asked how he felt about winning. He said, obviously I feel very good, but really I was lucky. He attributed his win to luck. I mean, clearly like astounding mental effort, and just extraordinary preparation, not just for this particular game, but for his entire life. Just the calories he burned just churning that brain at the chessboard, as you saw when he just scarfed down that trail mix. You couldn't work harder than he was working. But he said, well, really, I got lucky. All right, I don't know what this last note from Ethan is, but he says, I meant to mention, I'll just read it with you. I meant to mention in my last email, Li-Qingzhao and her beloved Song Dynasty poem of Singing Autumn Sorrow, where she employs the technique of repeated characters as much and as well as I've seen in Chinese poetry. So this is like the Ji, the quiet that begins Wei Yi's poem. And then he has his translation. Let's open it up and see. All right, this is Sorrow-and-Words by Li-Qingzhao, and God knows how I'm pronouncing that, but this is strange. This is different. I mean, this is Song Dynasty, so maybe this is different. Some different conventions. Yeah, this already just sounds different. All right, Sorrow-and-Words by Li-Qingzhao. Note after note, a long song, singing autumn sorrow. Searching, searching. Seeking, seeking. Quiet, quiet. Chilly, chilly. Mourning, mourning. Crying, crying. Downcast, downcast. Today the air was warm, but soon the cold returns. I feel that I may never rest. 3 cups, or more, diluted wine are warm. Yet wine is insufficient to resist persistent evening winds. The wild geese pass through. They batter my heart, too, even though I knew them well in the old days. The foxglove blossoms pile in heaps around the garden, so thin, all withered, worn. No one desires to pick them now and bring them home. Alone I keep watch at the window, biding my time until the night I crave comes creeping. Fine rain breaks up my watch and glazes wutong leaves until the dark arrives. Drip, 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 drip. Sorrow. Can I describe this world of pain and this damned melancholic mood in any truth with only one dull word? And the rhetorical question comes at the end. Maybe rhetorical. I mean, I think rhetorical. I don't know. Yeah, it's a strange one. The repeated words, I wonder how that may land differently in Chinese. I'm also wondering how many of them are single syllable. Let me see, the quiet, quiet. And of course, using my dumb American eyes to look at these characters. But I believe that's those. Yeah, I think that's the same quiet, the same little Ji, quiet, quiet. Which makes me wonder if that may have been where Wei Yi got his little repetition from. I do like some of that a lot. I mean, the repeated words are a little harder in English, but some of that I quite like. Also can't help but think of the wild swans at Cool. Right, the wild geese pass through, they batter my heart too, even though I knew them well in the old days. Oh, and I guess the Mary Oliver poem too. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she was a fan of Li-Qingzhao. All right, I'll read this one more time. Sorrow-and-Words by Li-Qingzhao. Note after note, a long song, singing autumn sorrow. Searching, searching, seeking, seeking, quiet, quiet, chilly, chilly, mourning, mourning, crying, crying, downcast, downcast. Today the air was warm, but soon the cold returns. I feel that I may never rest. 3 cups or more diluted wine are warm. Yet wine is insufficient to resist persistent evening winds. The wild geese pass through. They batter my heart too, even though I knew them well in the old days. The foxglove blossoms pile in heaps around the garden, so thin, all withered, worn. No one desires to pick them now and bring them home. Alone I keep watch at the window, biding my time until the night I crave comes creeping. Fine rain breaks up my watch and glazes Wutong leaves until the dark arrives. Drip, 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 drip. Sorrow. Can I describe this world of pain and this damned melancholic mood in any truth with only one dull word? Well, in praise of melancholy, in praise of black bile, I was, the pseudo-scientific explanation I have heard, the evolutionary psychological explanation I have heard for depression not being bred out of humanity, is that it may coincide with, I've heard a couple explanations. One is that it may, it's linked to a postpartum condition, right? The women tend to, the same hormone that induces breast milk also induces depression, prolactin, which I literally had I never had breast milk, but I did have a little gland pumping extra prolactin into my blood just to make me be depressed for a while. It was like my entire youth and adolescence, it turned out. But so I've heard that, in part maybe it's associated with, women staying put and, while the child is developing until it's, strong enough to wobble around for itself. But I've also heard speculation that there may be some connection between depression and introspection, depression and a tendency toward chewing over possible futures, and particularly bad possible futures. Looking at things without rose-tinted glasses. Because, we need most people to look at things with rose-tinted glasses in order to survive. But maybe you need 1 or 2 melancholics in your tribe to sit in a dark cave and think. And, part of me kind of loves the idea that long, hard, early game think that Ding took was a little melancholic reverie in which he imagined these dark paths into the future and chose the darker one. So, all right, that's all I got for you. I am working on an episode. Shane sent me some stuff. I'm having to do a lot of extra reading for it, but it's going to be interesting, I think. I just need to do some more work to prepare for it. And I'll have a Secret Show episode up for you soon. I think I know what I'm doing for that. Sure to infuriate somebody. Maybe. I think I will anger conservatives and progressives for opposite reasons with this one. But that's what the Secret Show is for. So that'll be at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Go check it out now. You get a week's access for free by putting in your email address, and after that, it is pretty fucking cheap and very much worth it. Thank you again to Ethan. By the way, congratulations, Ethan, new contributing editor to Nervous Review. And if you have not seen it, he recently did a guest newsletter for them. He did a terrific job with it. My favorite, he just pointed out a bunch of great stuff online. including some stuff in New Verse Review, kindly some SLEERICKETS related stuff, and just a bunch of other poetry stuff online. My favorite thing he pointed out was a poem by Mary Jo Salter that I didn't know about at all. Really, really good poem of hers. So do go check out his newsletter he did for New Verse Review, and he'll be doing a lot more work for them in the future. So well done, Ethan. I will put a link to his he has a blog called The Flummoxed. I have he sent me a thing he did recently that's sort of a thematic commonplace book that I feel like is it's like an AI, like an antidote to AI writing. But I may return to that in next week or the week after. But huge thanks to him. Please do go check out Alice's episode on the Du Fu poem. And yeah, links to everything in the show notes. Thank you for listening. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS.gmail.com. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.